My name is Dorothy Mae Washington, and today I need to tell you something that's been weighing on my heart like a stone. At 90 years old, I thought I'd seen everything life could throw at me. I survived the segregation of the 1940s in Alabama, worked as a seamstress in Detroit's factories, raised my daughter Sarah as a single mother after her father left us when she was just 3. I thought I knew what heartbreak felt like, but nothing, absolutely nothing, prepared me for the silence that filled my small apartment in Chicago on December 15th, my 90th birthday. I had woken up that morning with the kind of excitement that only birthdays can bring, even at my age. I put on my best purple dress, the one Sarah had given me 2 Christmases ago, and I waited. The morning sun streamed through my kitchen window as I made my famous buttermilk biscuits, thinking she might come by for breakfast like she used to when she was little. I remember sitting in my favorite armchair, the one with the worn velvet arms where I'd rocked Sarah to sleep countless nights. The clock on the wall ticked away the hours. Noon came and went, then afternoon. The biscuits grew cold on the counter. My phone remained silent. No calls, no texts, nothing. Not even a simple, "Happy birthday, Mama." For 67 years, I had been Sarah's everything. When she wanted to go to college but couldn't afford it, I worked double shifts at the factory and cleaned offices at night. When she needed a down payment for her first house, I gave her my entire savings. When her marriage fell apart, I was there with open arms and a shoulder to cry on. I had lived my entire life making sure she never felt the abandonment I felt as a child in that orphanage in Birmingham. But as the sun set on my 90th birthday, painting my apartment in shades of orange and gold, I realized something that cut deeper than any pain I'd ever known. To my own daughter, the woman I'd sacrificed everything for, I had become invisible. The woman who had never missed a single one of her birthdays, who had been present for every milestone, every heartbreak, every triumph. I had been forgotten on the one day that marked 9 decades of my existence on this earth. That night, as I blew out a single candle on a store-bought cupcake, I made a decision that would change everything. The next morning brought no apology, no explanation, nothing. I sat at my kitchen table, staring at my phone, willing it to ring. The silence was deafening. Outside my window, Chicago was waking up, people rushing to work, children walking to school, life moving forward as if my world hadn't just crumbled. It was then that I realized this wasn't just forgetfulness. This was something much deeper, much more painful. Sarah lived only 20 minutes away in her beautiful suburban home in Evanston. She had a successful career as a marketing executive, a life I had helped build with my sacrifices. Yet somehow, in all her busy success, she had erased me completely. I thought about calling her, but my pride, the same pride that had carried me through decades of struggle, wouldn't let me. Why should I have to remind my own daughter that I existed? Why should I have to beg for the basic acknowledgement that I was still alive, still here, still her mother? The memories flooded back like a dam bursting. I remembered working 3 jobs to pay for her dance lessons, her piano lessons, her college tuition. I remembered sitting in hospital waiting rooms during her childhood illnesses, holding her hand through her first heartbreak, celebrating her graduation, her wedding, her promotions. I had been her cheerleader, her safety net, her unwavering support system. But when had she last asked about my health? When had she last visited just to spend time with me? When had she last said, "I love you," without it being a rushed goodbye at the end of a phone call? The truth hit me like a cold Chicago wind. I had become nothing more than an obligation to her, and apparently not even a very important one. That afternoon, I walked to the corner store where Mrs. Chen, the elderly Korean woman who owned it, greeted me with genuine warmth. "Happy belated birthday, Dorothy," she said with a smile. "I saw you buying that cupcake yesterday. Did you have a nice celebration?" A stranger remembered my birthday when my own daughter didn't. I tell you this story because I want you to understand what happens when love becomes one-sided, when sacrifice becomes invisible, when a mother's heart finally breaks beyond repair. What would you do if the person you loved most in the world simply forgot you existed? The days that followed my birthday blurred together like watercolors in the rain. I found myself moving through my apartment like a ghost, touching the photographs on my mantelpiece, pictures of Sarah at every stage of her life, smiling back at me from frames I had carefully dusted every week for years. There was 5-year-old Sarah in her Easter dress, the one I had sewn by hand because we couldn't afford store-bought. There was teenage Sarah at her high school graduation, beaming with pride as I stood beside her in my best dress, the one I had saved for months to buy. There was adult Sarah at her wedding, radiant in white, with me beside her in mother of the bride blue, tears of joy streaming down my face. But looking at these photos now, I saw something I had never noticed before. In every single picture, I was looking at Sarah with pure adoration, while she looked at the camera. Even in our most precious moments, her attention was always somewhere else, always on the next thing, the next achievement, the next milestone. Had I been fooling myself all these years about the depth of our connection? The silence from her phone was becoming its own language, speaking volumes about how little I mattered in her busy, successful life. I imagined her in her corner office, making important decisions, attending important meetings, living her important life. Did she even remember she had a mother? Or had I become just another item on a to-do list that never quite got checked off? I started taking longer walks around my neighborhood, partly for exercise, but mostly to escape the suffocating quiet of my apartment. The autumn leaves crunched under my feet as I walked past the playground where I used to push Sarah on the swings. I remembered her laughter, the way she would beg for just one more push, Mama. Now I wondered if she even remembered those days, or if they had been erased by the demands of her adult life. Mrs. Rodriguez from apartment 3B stopped me in the hallway one evening. "Dorothy, honey, you look tired. Everything okay?" Her genuine concern made my eyes well up with tears. Here was another near stranger showing more care for my well-being than my own daughter. That night, I sat in my armchair and felt something shifting inside me, like tectonic plates moving deep beneath the earth. The unconditional love I had carried for Sarah for 67 years was transforming into something else. Not hatred, never that, but a kind of protective numbness. My heart was building walls to shield itself from further disappointment. I realized that I had spent so many years being Sarah's mother that I had forgotten how to be Dorothy. But maybe, just maybe, it was time to remember who I was before I became someone who could be so easily forgotten. 3 weeks had passed since my birthday, and still nothing from Sarah. But something unexpected was happening inside me. Instead of growing weaker with each passing day, I was growing stronger. The pain was still there, sharp and real, but underneath it, something else was stirring. Something I hadn't felt in years. A sense of my own worth that didn't depend on being needed. I started visiting the Harold Washington Library downtown, taking the bus through the city I had called home for over 50 years. Sitting in the quiet reading room, surrounded by books and the gentle whisper of turning pages, I began to remember who Dorothy Mae Washington was beyond being Sarah's mother. I had been a skilled seamstress, a woman who could create beauty with her hands. I had been a survivor, someone who had overcome poverty and prejudice to build a life of dignity. I had been a friend, a neighbor, a human being with value that existed independent of anyone else's recognition. It was during one of these library visits that I met Eleanor, a 78-year-old retired teacher who was researching her family genealogy. We struck up a conversation over coffee in the library cafe, and she told me about her work volunteering at the Hephzibah Children's Home, the same orphanage where I had spent my early years in Birmingham before being moved to Chicago. "They're doing such beautiful work there now," Eleanor said, her eyes lighting up, providing not just shelter, but real love, education, and hope to children who have been forgotten by everyone else. They're creating families for kids who thought they'd never have one. Her words hit me like lightning. I thought about my own time at Hephzibah, how the caregivers there had shown me more genuine love and attention in my childhood than my own daughter was showing me now. They had taught me that family wasn't just about blood. It was about showing up, about caring, about remembering that someone else exists and matters. That evening, I sat at my kitchen table with a cup of tea and my old address book, looking up the contact information for Hephzibah Children's Home. My hands trembled slightly as I dialed the number, but my voice was steady when the director answered. "Hello," I said. "My name is Dorothy Washington, and I was a resident of your facility many years ago. I'd like to know more about how I might help the children you're caring for now." As I spoke with the director about their programs, their needs, their dreams for the children in their care, I felt something I hadn't experienced in weeks. Purpose. These children, like I had been, were forgotten by the world. But unlike my daughter, they would remember kindness. They would treasure love. They would never take for granted someone who chose to care about their existence. After I hung up the phone, I walked to my bedroom and opened the drawer where I kept my important papers. There, beneath my insurance policies and medical records, was my will, a simple document that left everything to Sarah. I pulled it out and stared at it for a long moment, then made a decision that would change everything. Tomorrow, I would call my lawyer. It was time to ensure that my legacy went to people who understood the value of love, who wouldn't forget the hand that helped them, who would honor the memory of a woman who had learned at 90 years old that she was worth remembering. The meeting with my lawyer, Mr. Peterson, took place on a crisp November morning in his downtown office overlooking the Chicago River. The autumn wind rattled the windows as I sat across from his mahogany desk, my weathered hands clutching my purse with the same determination that had carried me through 9 decades of life. He had been handling my legal affairs for 15 years, ever since I'd bought my little apartment with the money I'd saved from working double shifts at the textile factory. His kind eyes, magnified behind wire-rimmed glasses, showed genuine concern as I explained what I wanted to do. "Mrs. Washington," he said gently, leaning forward in his leather chair, "are you absolutely certain about this? Changing a will is a significant decision, especially when it involves disinheriting your only child. Have you considered the possibility that Sarah might have a reasonable explanation for missing your birthday?" I looked out his office window at the bustling streets of Chicago below, watching people hurry past with their own purposes, their own destinations, their own families who hopefully remembered they existed. The city that had been my home for over 50 years stretched out before me, full of life and movement, while I sat here making decisions about death and legacy. "Mr. Peterson," I said, my voice steady despite the storm raging in my heart. "I've spent 67 years making sure my daughter never felt unwanted or forgotten. I worked 3 jobs to pay for her dance lessons, sold my grandmother's jewelry to help with her college tuition, and gave her my entire life savings for her first house down payment. Now I know what it feels like to be invisible to the person you love most, and I won't let other children experience that abandonment if I can help it." The paperwork took 2 hours to complete, each page a testament to a lifetime of careful planning and modest accumulation. With each signature, each initial, each legal phrase that transferred my worldly possessions away from my daughter, I felt both liberation and profound sadness washing over me in waves. This wasn't revenge, it was recognition. Recognition that love should flow both ways like a river, that respect should be mutual, like a handshake, that remembering someone's existence shouldn't be optional when you're family. But even as I made these changes, signing away Sarah's inheritance with a steady hand, the mother in me ached with every stroke of the pen. Every night, I still found myself hoping my phone would ring, that Sarah's voice would fill the suffocating silence with an explanation, an apology, anything that would show she remembered she had a mother who loved her unconditionally. The hope was becoming its own form of torture, like pressing on a bruise just to feel something. I threw myself into volunteering at Hephzibah Children's Home with the fervor of someone who had found new purpose. The director, Mrs. Williams, a warm African-American woman in her 50s with kind eyes and a gentle smile, welcomed me with open arms and genuine gratitude. Soon, I was spending 3 days a week there, helping with homework in the sunny study room, teaching some of the older girls to sew on the vintage Singer machine I had donated, and simply being present for children who needed to know that someone cared about their day, their dreams, their very existence. 8-year-old Marcus, with his gap-toothed grin and endless curiosity, reminded me so much of Sarah at that age. Bright, inquisitive, full of questions about everything from why the sky was blue to whether angels really had wings. When he showed me his crayon drawing of a house with stick figures inside, my heart both soared and broke into 1,000 pieces. "That's my dream house, Miss Dorothy," he said, his small finger tracing the colorful figures. "Someday, I'll have a real family who won't forget about me, who'll remember my birthday and help me with homework and tuck me in at night." The irony wasn't lost on me, cutting through my consciousness like a knife through silk. Here I was, surrounded by children who had been abandoned or forgotten by their biological families, while my own daughter had essentially done the same to me. But these children appreciated every moment of attention, every story I told about my childhood in Alabama, every hug I offered when they scraped a knee or felt homesick for families they'd never really had. They understood the precious value of being remembered, being seen, being loved without conditions or expectations. December arrived with an early snowfall that blanketed Chicago in pristine white, transforming the harsh urban landscape into something magical and peaceful. I was at Hephzibah, sitting cross-legged on the floor of the activity room, helping decorate the Christmas tree with the children, when I felt a sharp, crushing pain in my chest that took my breath away. The ornament I was holding, a handmade angel crafted by 10-year-old Maria, slipped from my fingers and shattered on the hardwood floor, the sound echoing through the sudden silence as concerned faces turned toward me. Mrs. Williams insisted on taking me to Northwestern Memorial Hospital, her steady presence a comfort as the paramedics checked my vital signs and loaded me into the ambulance. The city lights blurred past the windows as we raced through the streets I knew so well, and I found myself thinking not about dying, but about living, about what I had accomplished and what I still needed to do. Tobias Martinez, a soft-spoken man with gentle hands and honest eyes, delivered news I had been expecting for months, but hoping to avoid a little longer. Mrs. Washington, your heart is showing significant signs of strain. The arrhythmia is becoming more frequent, and at your age, with your medical history of hypertension and the stress you've been under, I need to be completely honest with you about what this means for your prognosis. I listened calmly as he explained my condition in medical terms that sounded both foreign and familiar, the limited treatment options available to someone my age, the reality that my time was becoming more precious than the finest diamonds. But instead of the fear I expected to feel, a strange sense of peace settled over me like a warm blanket. I had made my decision about my legacy, and now I had the motivation to ensure everything was properly arranged before my heart decided it had beaten enough. That evening, I called Mr. Peterson from my hospital bed, the phone heavy in my trembling hands. I need you to finalize everything we discussed, I told him, my voice stronger than I felt. And I want to add something else, a letter to be read with the will, something that explains not just what I've done, but why I've done it. Over the next few days, as I recovered enough to return to my apartment, I wrote the most important letter of my life, sitting at my kitchen table with my favorite fountain pen, the one Sarah had given me for Mother's Day 15 years ago, back when she still remembered such things. I poured my heart onto cream-colored stationery. I wrote about love that goes unrecognized and unappreciated, about the children at Hephzibah who would treasure every dollar because they understood what it meant to have nothing, about the difference between being a mother and being remembered as one. The letter wasn't angry. Anger would have been easier to write and harder to read. Instead, it was honest in a way that cut deeper than rage ever could. I wrote about the birthday that broke my heart into pieces I was still trying to gather, about the silence that followed like a cold wind through an empty house, about the gradual realization that I had raised a daughter who could forget the woman who had never forgotten her, not once in 67 years. But I also wrote about forgiveness, about understanding that sometimes the greatest gift we can give someone is allowing them to face the consequences of their choices. I sealed the letter with hands that shook from more than just age and gave it to Mr. Peterson along with my final instructions, watching him place it carefully in his safe. Everything I owned, my modest apartment with its memories embedded in every wall, my savings account built penny by penny over decades of careful living, my small but meaningful possessions collected over a lifetime, would go to Hephzibah Children's Home. The children there would benefit from a lifetime of my careful saving, my modest but wise investments, my simple but secure existence. But I did leave something for Sarah, the most valuable thing I could give her, worth more than any inheritance. I left her the truth about what her choices had cost, wrapped in love and tied with the ribbon of opportunity to learn from it. Sometimes the most loving thing a parent can do is let their child face the natural consequences of their actions, even when it breaks the parent's heart to do so. I passed away peacefully in my sleep on a snowy January morning, 3 days after my 91st birthday, a birthday that once again passed unnoticed by Sarah, unmarked by so much as a text message or phone call. Mrs. Chen from the corner store found me when I didn't come in for my usual morning coffee and copy of the Chicago Tribune, a routine I had maintained for over a decade. She had become more of a daughter to me in those final months than my own flesh and blood, checking on me daily, bringing me soup when I was under the weather, and remembering every story I told about my past. The funeral was small but profoundly meaningful. held at Mount Olive Baptist Church, where I had worshipped for 30 years. The children and staff from Hephzibah filled the modest chapel, their presence a testament to the love I had found in my final years. 12-year-old Jasmine sang Amazing Grace with a voice so pure it seemed to lift the very rafters, while little Marcus placed a hand-drawn picture of me on my casket, showing me with angel wings and a smile. Mrs. Rodriguez spoke about how I had helped her navigate the immigration process when her husband died, bringing her meals and translating documents late into the night. Eleanor from the library shared stories about our friendship and my volunteer work, describing how I had helped organize literacy programs for underprivileged children. Even Dr. Martinez came to pay his respects, telling mourners how I had faced my diagnosis with grace and dignity. Sarah arrived 15 minutes late, her high heels clicking against the church's marble floor as she hurried down the aisle. She was dressed in an expensive black Armani suit that probably cost more than I spent on clothing in a year, checking her iPhone even as she walked past the people who had genuinely loved me. She looked around the chapel with obvious confusion, as if wondering who all these people were and why they were mourning a woman she had barely thought about in months, their tears a mystery to someone who had forgotten I was worth grieving. After the service, as mourners gathered in the church basement for the traditional meal of fried chicken and comfort food, Mr. Peterson approached Sarah in the parking lot where she stood alone, isolated by her own choices. "Ms. Thompson," he said formally, using her married name with professional courtesy, "I need to schedule a time to read your mother's will. Are you available tomorrow afternoon at 2 o'clock? Sarah nodded absently, already thinking about the inheritance that would help pay for her daughter Emma's college tuition at Northwestern, and maybe that vacation home in Lake Geneva she'd been wanting. She had mentally calculated my modest assets and assumed there would be enough to make a meaningful difference in her comfortable but expensive lifestyle. She had no idea that her world was about to shift completely off its axis. The next day, Sarah sat in Mr. Peterson's office, expecting a routine reading of what she assumed would be a simple will, leaving everything to her as the only surviving child. Her face showed mild interest mixed with impatience as he began with the standard legal language, her manicured fingers drumming against the leather armrest of her chair. But as the words began to sink in, as the true meaning of my final wishes became clear, her expression changed from boredom to confusion to absolute shock. "I don't understand," she said, her voice rising to a pitch I would have recognized from her childhood tantrums. "There must be some mistake. I'm her only child, her only family. Where is my inheritance? What about Emma's college fund?" Mr. Peterson's voice was gentle but firm as he explained that Dorothy Mae Washington had left everything, every penny, every possession, every trace of a lifetime's accumulation to Hephzibah Children's Home. The apartment, the savings, the small investment portfolio, even my grandmother's china and my mother's wedding ring. All of it would go to children who understood the value of being remembered. Then he pulled out the letter, the one I had written with trembling hands but a steady heart, my final words to the daughter who had forgotten how to love her mother. "Your mother left this for you," he said, handing her the cream-colored envelope marked in my careful handwriting. "For Sarah, with love and lessons." 6 months after my passing, Sarah stood in the main hall of Hephzibah Children's Home, staring at a bronze plaque mounted on the wall beside the entrance to the new library. The plaque read, "The Dorothy Mae Washington Memorial Library. In honor of a woman who understood that love means showing up, that family means remembering, and that the greatest gift we can give a child is the knowledge that they matter." She had come here every week since reading my letter, trying to understand the woman I had been beyond her limited memories of me as simply Mom, the person who was always there, always available, always ready to sacrifice for her needs. She had spoken with Mrs. Williams about my volunteer work, learning how I had spent countless hours helping children with homework, teaching them to sew, and simply listening to their dreams and fears. She had talked with the children about the stories I told of growing up in Alabama during segregation, about the sewing lessons I gave on Saturday mornings, about my quiet generosity and unwavering presence in their lives. "Your mother was special," 8-year-old Marcus told her during one visit, his gap-toothed smile reminding Sarah painfully of her own childhood. "She remembered everybody's name, and she never forgot to ask about our day. She knew that Keisha liked purple and that Tommy was scared of thunderstorms. She made us feel like we mattered, like someone in the world cared if we were happy or sad. Those words cut deeper than any anger could have, slicing through Sarah's defenses like a surgeon's scalpel. She realized that I had given these children something she had stopped giving me years ago, the simple but profound acknowledgement that they existed, that their lives had value, that someone cared enough to remember their preferences, their fears, their small daily triumphs and defeats. The inheritance I left to Hephzibah had been substantial enough to build the new library and fund educational programs for years to come. My lifetime of careful saving, of choosing generic brands and mending clothes instead of buying new ones, of walking instead of taking taxis, all of it had added up to something meaningful. Every book purchased, every child who learned to read in that space, every story shared within those walls would be a living testament to a love that had been overlooked but never diminished. Sarah began volunteering at the home herself, not to assuage the guilt that ate at her like acid, but to understand the lesson I had tried to teach her through my final act. She read to the children every Tuesday evening, helped with homework on weekends, and slowly began to comprehend what I had known all along, that being present for someone, truly present, is the greatest gift you can give another human being. One evening, as she was leaving the home after reading bedtime stories to the younger children, Mrs. Williams walked her to the door through the hallway, lined with children's artwork. "Your mother would be proud," she said softly, her hand resting gently on Sarah's shoulder. "She always believed that love could teach, even after we're gone. She used to say that the best lessons are the ones that hurt a little, because those are the ones we remember." Sarah nodded, tears streaming down her face as she finally understood the depth of what she had lost. "I just wish I had learned this lesson while she was still here to see it, while I could have told her I was sorry, while I could have shown her she mattered." "Oh, but she did see it," Mrs. Williams replied with a knowing smile that reminded Sarah of my own gentle expressions. "The last time she was here, just a few days before she passed, she told me she had faith that someday you would understand. She said that was the real inheritance she was leaving you. Not money, but wisdom. Not things, but truth. Not wealth, but the knowledge of what real love looks like." As Sarah drove home through the Chicago streets that had been my world for so many years, she thought about Emma, the daughter she was raising, about the example she wanted to set, about the kind of love she wanted to give and receive. She pulled over at a gas station and called her teenage daughter, her hands shaking as she dialed. "Hi, sweetheart," she said when Emma answered, her voice thick with emotion and newfound understanding. "I just wanted to call and tell you I love you, and to ask about your day. Really ask, and really listen to your answer." There was surprise in Emma's voice, but also warmth and curiosity. "Mom, is everything okay? You sound different." "Everything is exactly as it should be," Sarah replied, and for the first time since reading my letter, she meant it with every fiber of her being. I may not have lived to see Sarah's transformation, but my legacy lived on in every child who felt valued at Hephzibah, in every lesson learned about the importance of showing up for the people we love, and in the knowledge that sometimes the greatest act of love is teaching someone the true cost of taking love for granted. Love is not inherited through blood or law. It is earned through presence, nurtured through attention, and remembered through actions. And in the end, that is the only inheritance that truly matters, the only legacy that lasts beyond our final breath. If this story touched your heart, please like this video and subscribe to our channel for more stories about love, family, and the lessons that shape our lives. Remember, the people who love you are not guaranteed to be there forever. Show them they matter while you still can. Final.